Video games are the merger of forced perspective and complex coding to give the look and feel of an activity you are not actually engaged with. In other words, it's all an illusion, and that trickery may persuade you into thinking you are experiencing something unique, when in reality, the developers are pushing you down a straight line all along. Hey, it's Game Rant, and here are 7 linear games that feel like an open world. Ooh, tricky. Number 7. Tomb Raider. 2013's Tomb Raider is one of the single most successful video game reboots, at least in terms of design, as its millions upon millions of copies sold apparently didn't impress the Square Enix board of directors. But nevertheless, this new origin for Lara Croft saw a doe-eyed college student transform into the arbiter of justice in a world of explosive unhinged violence, or rather an island of unhinged violence, whose brief circular environments gave the appearance of free roaming while never breaking the pace of an action film. This may have lacked the expected tombs, but its brief hubs gave the impression of a much larger environment. Number 6. A Plague Tale: Innocence. Oh boy. So A Plague Tale: Innocence isn't as straightforward an explanation, as this game isn't a world you would want to explore in any direction. Rat-infested death has consumed the land, leaving nothing but horror and depression in its wake. Our two protagonists, Amicia and Hugo, are lost to wander a world without hope of reconciliation, as all that mattered to them was ripped from their lives prior to this endless death march. A Plague Tale: Innocence maintains the appearance of a horizon of fog, as if each rotting building they scurry into is saving them from a slower, sadder death. So yeah, it feels like it could go on forever, much like Purgatory. Number 5. Resident Evil 4. In a rather fun turn of events, you could easily say the original Resident Evil 4 inspired almost every third-person shooter going forward, including the Tomb Raider reboot. But this Resident Evil 4 remake sure reminds us of the pacing of the Tomb Raider reboot. With each mandatory area comes a handful of much smaller locations with hidden items and additional resources. But it's in the presentation of these environments that gives the impression of history and local culture. But Resident Evil 4 is a game with hard cuts between chapters, and yet it's so well paced, you'll feel you're on an adventure all of your own. Number 4. Black Myth: Wukong. From an unknown game to an internet juggernaut, Black Myth: Wukong had players already guessing what its limits would be right from the first trailer. Sure, this game borrows plenty from Dark Souls and the general combat styles of From Software, but this is not Elden Ring. It's a clever branching path and hub environment that allows players to explore and engage with the combat system and optional boss fights, while never straying too far from the intended path. Black Myth: Wukong is a compelling take on the formula, while also containing a deep story steeped in 16th century Chinese fiction. Number 3. Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice. Here's a fun fact. Before Sekiro was unveiled, some had assumed From Software was going to develop a brand new Tenchu stealth assassins. And in a way, they did. Sekiro stages include many new and original enemies and objects that can be visited non-linearly, but ultimately lead towards the same succession of stages. If there is a reason to explore beyond the direct and obvious enemies lumbering about, it's to cool off before fighting the same sequence you failed at the past 30 times. If you thought Elden Ring was hard, Sekiro will have you begging the shadows for mercy. Don't say we didn't warn you. Number 2. Warhammer 40,000 Space Marine 2. This sure took a long time, didn't it? The first Space Marine struck a chord with players beyond the Warhammer fandom, thanks in large part to its accessible, hyper-violent gameplay. But the true secret sauce to Space Marine 2 is in its environmental design. Throughout the game, players will witness some truly spectacular locations. Witness, but never actually visit themselves. Nor would you ever consider it, as Space Marines tend to be slaughtering what's right in front of them, in the most blunt, brute force straight line to victory. Heck, it doesn't even feel fair sometimes, but it always feels good. Number 1. The Last of Us. There may come a day when open-world games can be rendered and designed with the complexity of Naughty Dog's The Last of Us. But this requires much more than horsepower. It requires a collection of artists carefully creating a world overrun by nature following a deadly pandemic wiping out large portions of humanity and destabilizing modern society. In short, each area needed to reflect environmental storytelling, but for humanity. Naughty Dog hit such a high note from its very first location and remarkably carried it forward for the full of the game, which is why The Last of Us and its subsequent remakes and remasters is still considered one of the very best games of all time, and a masterclass in immersion. Anyway, that's gonna do it for this list, but we want to hear from you. Which linear games feel like an open world? Could be something new or old school. Let us know in the thread below and we'll be sure to read your answers. So keep clicking around here on Game Rant, and we'll see you next time.